Yo dudes, Darkness here. My throat is still recovering from a real nasty virus, so enjoy these 2 episodes of Alone in the Woods featuring shapeshifters, mountain monsters, and more. Alright then, I'm gonna go snort some cough drops. Dark Lore 2 from Smoke Jumper. Well, I applaud your storytelling. My chiropractor friend said, the one who inspired my last story, had the chance to listen to what I wrote based on the events he shared with me over several visits. To say the least, he was impressed. So much so, in fact, that he put me in touch with another friend of his, a man who had quite the story to tell. After hearing what this man had been through, I decided to do my best to write it from his perspective, making sure to capture his expertise and the rawness of his experience. For the sake of this story, I'll call him Rick. I'm Rick, and I've spent over 20 years working in forestry, 10 years as a smoke jumper, and another 10 as a forestry surveyor. As a smoke jumper, I parachuted into remote areas to fight forest fires. We were the first responders, carrying everything we needed to contain fires until backup arrived. It was tough, exhausting work, but also incredibly rewarding. When I transitioned to being a forestry surveyor, the focus shifted to assessing forest health. My job involved studying tree growth, monitoring ecosystems, and helping forests recover after disasters. It was slower paced, but no less important. Both roles provided me with unforgettable experiences with wildlife. As a smoke jumper, I witnessed the chaos caused by fire, as animals like bears and mountain lions were forced to flee in panic. On the other hand, as a surveyor, my encounters were generally more peaceful. Deer would occasionally approach me, and hawks would circle overhead as I worked. However, not every encounter was tranquil. I once startled a rattlesnake on a burned trail, an experience that I will never forget. The aftermath of wildfires is what lingers in my mind the most. I once conducted a survey of a portion of wilderness after a devastating fire. The landscape was eerily haunting. Everything was covered in ash, and the trees stood as scorched skeletons. The silence was deafening. Before a fire, forests are filled with life-giving sounds. Afterward, there's nothing. It's as if the very essence of life has been drained from the land. I'll never forget finding a deer carcass, half buried in ash, a stark reminder of how devastating these fires are for all living things. By the time I reached my survey site, I felt like the fire's destruction was etched into my boots and lungs. Seeing a burned forest up close is something I'll never get used to. Even with all I've faced, nothing compares to the eerie silence of a blackened forest. Though, if I had to choose, I'd still take that over what happened to me once while fishing in Alaska. I was waist-deep in a stream, focused on casting for rainbow trout, when I heard a loud crack from the brush behind me. Slowly turning, I spotted a massive grizzly bear stepping out from the undergrowth. Its golden-brown fur glistened in the sunlight, and its sheer size sent a chill down my spine. I froze while my heart pounded, running through every bear safety tip I'd ever learned. At first, the bear didn't care about me. It lumbered downstream, swiping at the trout in the water. I took the chance to quietly move upstream, trying not to draw its attention. But as the minutes passed, the bear was slowly moving closer. My grip tightened on my fishing rod, and every instinct screamed for me to run. But I knew better. When the bear got close enough that I could feel its presence in my chest, it stopped. It lifted its massive head and stared right at me. My options were non-existent. I couldn't run, couldn't fight. All I could do was lower my rod and back away, murmuring soft, calming words. The bear let out a dismissive huff and turned back to its hunt for fish, letting me go. Despite my years in the wild, That encounter was unlike anything I'd faced, but it wouldn't compare to what came next. In the spring of 2024, I was asked to survey the Gospel Hump and Frank Church wilderness areas in Idaho. The job sounded straightforward. Parachute into Gospel Hump, collect water and vegetation samples, and take tree ring data to assess forest health. Once done, I'd head to Frank Church to do the same before hiking out. The mission was urgent. Because of the pandemic, these ecosystems hadn't been monitored in years. Any changes to water quality, plant life, or signs of pests might have gone unnoticed. The stakes felt high. It was critical to see how these wildernesses were holding up. Once the permit process began, I planned meticulously for the vast and unforgiving wilderness areas. Detailed maps guided my route, and I identified potential hazards like landslides from rapid snowmelt. Contingency routes ensured safety. I also marked water sources, areas where fire were permitted, and emergency exits. The Gospel Hump Wilderness covers over 200,000 acres of rugged land, with steep ridges and deep canyons. Elevations range from just under 2,000 feet to over 8,000 feet, and the wildlife is as diverse as it is unpredictable. Black bears, cougars, elk, mountain goats, and even smaller creatures like foxes and marmots. The Frank Church Wilderness is in a league of its own, 2.3 million acres of untamed land. It's one of the most remote areas in the lower 48 states, with jagged peaks, rushing rivers, and dense forests. This vast wilderness is home to grizzly bears, wolves, moose, and even wolverines. The steep terrain and unpredictable weather make it more challenging than any place I'd worked before. Both wildernesses combined are roughly 4,000 square miles. Packing for a trip like this isn't just about convenience, it's about survival. These federally protected wilderness areas have strict rules. Motorized vehicles and tools like chainsaws are banned, so everything has to be done by hand. Open fires are prohibited in some places to prevent wildfires, which means cooking and staying warm can be tricky. These rules preserve the wild while ensuring every gear item matters. Lightweight yet essential, my pack included a custom single-pole tent, 2 pounds, a mummy sleeping bag, football-sized, binoculars, a collapsible fishing pole with lightweight lures, small rations of food for each day. For starting fires, I carried a flint striker and a lighter. Redundancy is crucial in remote areas. I always carry a firearm and a 4-shot tranquilizer gun on trips like this. The tranquilizer is a humane way to handle wildlife encounters without harming the animal. I purchased a multi-shot one because another forestry surveyor I knew had been mauled by a bear when he missed. One dart is usually enough to sedate an average-sized black bear, around 300 pounds, within minutes, keeping it down for 20 to 30 minutes, long enough for tagging or relocation. Now, whether it's a bear or a mountain lion, they're not malicious. They're just trying to survive, like me. The firearm, a .357, is a last resort, something I hope never to use. But in a place like Frank Church, being prepared for anything is non-negotiable. Clothing was crucial for this trip. I packed moisture-wicking base layers, durable hiking pants, and a waterproof shell. My GPS and satellite phone were essential. Cell phones don't work there, and the sat phone was my only reliable link. I also carried a digital camera, maps, and a compass as GPS backups. My first aid kit was stocked with basics and a tourniquet, as help would be far away. Utensils, a multi-tool, and enough food completed the pack, weighing about 35 pounds. Not light, but manageable. By mid-June, the permits were ready, a faster turnaround than usual, likely because of the urgency of the mission. My departure was set for just after the 4th of July. On the morning of the jump, I boarded a twin-engine turboprop, a de Havilland DHC-6 Twin Otter. It's a small, reliable plane built for exactly this kind of work, with the agility to navigate rugged terrain and take off from short airstrips. We launched from McCall, Idaho, and as the engines roared, I felt that familiar mix of excitement and nerves. At 12,000 feet, I peered out the window. Below, the Gospel Hump Wilderness stretched like an emerald sea, jagged ridges and shimmering streams breaking the dense forest. It humbled me to realize how untouched this land was. The pilot gave the signal. I strapped on my parachute, a square rig model perfect for tight landings. My heart raced as I approached the open door, the wind roaring around me. Even after years of jumps, that moment before stepping out still brought a rush of adrenaline. I took a deep breath and leapt. The freefall was exhilarating. The wind whipped past me as the ground seemed to rise up. At 3,500 feet, I pulled the cord, and the parachute deployed with a satisfying whoosh. My descent slowed, and I used the toggles to guide myself toward the clearing that had been marked as my landing site. I landed smoothly, rolling to absorb the impact. My first task was securing the parachute. I quickly gathered the fabric and stuffed it into its bag to keep it from tangling or blowing away. Once that was done, I took a moment to orient myself. I pulled out my GPS to check my location. My first target zone was only a few miles northeast. The terrain was as tough as I'd anticipated. Steep inclines, dense underbrush, and rocky paths that required careful navigation. If I hadn't parachuted in, it would have taken me at least 4 to 5 days to get to this remote spot. When I reached the site, I got to work. Kneeling by a cold stream, I filled sterile vials with water samples, sealing them to prevent contamination. I recorded the temperature, pH, and turbidity while noting any odd smells or discoloration. For the vegetation survey, I checked the health of nearby trees, looked for signs of disease, and took core samples to study their growth. It was slow, methodical work, but this was what I'd been trained for. Once finished, I looked at my map and reviewed my route to the next site, a solid 15 miles away. There was no way I'd make it by nightfall. The forest was dense, the kind of place where sunlight barely filters through the canopy, and every step felt like 3, thanks to the underbrush and the weight of my pack. Hiking until 7 p.m., I paused for a quick meal and continued for an hour before finding a spot to camp. Dense foliage insulated me and masked my scent. By 8:30 in my tent, fast asleep by 9 p.m., exhausted from the day. I woke to a chilling scream echoing through the forest around midnight. The scream, deep, guttural, and unlike anything I'd ever heard. I've heard bears growl, mountain lions scream, and wolves howl in my years out here. I've even heard lions roar on a vacation to Africa. But this sound was different, something primal and haunting. The horrifying scream sounded like the word "woe" was being exhaled with every ounce of strength from whatever was making it, dragging the scream out for about 45 seconds. The sound reverberated all around, making every hair on my body stand on end. Then, as the first scream died out, another one answered it from a distance. It was as if 2 massive creatures were communicating or challenging each other from opposite sides of the valley. The horrific back and forth continued for nearly 2 hours, each scream as terrifying as the last. The forest, which had been alive with the usual nocturnal sounds of insects and small animals, was now deathly silent, as though every living thing was holding its breath. Sasquatch stories had always fascinated me in a casual fireside kind of way. I'd heard them in bars, taverns, and fire camps, but I'd never been a believer, or a skeptic for that matter. I'd always sat on the fence, enjoying the stories without fully buying into them. But these screams, they sounded exactly like the descriptions I'd heard. It was hard to shake the feeling that something was really out there. When the screams finally ceased, the silence was unnerving. My nerves were shot, and I couldn't sleep. Exhaustion took over, and I drifted off, but it was restless sleep. I woke up around 9 a.m., much later than usual, the sunlight already streaming through the forest canopy. Frustration hit me hard. Not only was I 2 hours behind schedule, but the unsettling events of the night were fresh in my mind. I had no desire to linger in this area any longer than necessary. The thought of fishing, which had excited me the night before, was now the last thing on my mind. All I wanted was to pack up and get moving. By 9:30, my tent was stowed, my pack was on, and I was hiking with purpose, trying to shake the lingering unease from the night's screams. I wasn't just hiking, I was pushing myself in a way I hadn't in years. The thought of those sounds haunted every step. My rational side told me I was safe, but instinct told me to keep moving. I had 11 miles to reach my target area, including a mountain pass. Normally, I'd pace myself on steep terrain, but not that morning. I jogged through valleys and charged uphill with determination. I was traveling to testing sites with no path, which resulted in slow progress. The early morning light cast long shadows in the valleys, and the air carried the heavy scent of damp moss and pine. Normally, I'd photograph the streams, towering trees, or an occasional bird flitting through the canopy. But my focus was singular. Put as much distance as possible between me and that eerie campsite. The brutal climb to the mountain pass left my legs burning and lungs heaving, yet I pushed on, adrenaline overriding fatigue. The narrow pass with jagged rocks and steep drop-offs demanded caution. The wind chilled my sweat-soaked clothes. At the peak, I paused to listen to the unnerving silence. No birds, no rustling leaves, only the relentless howl of the wind. It reminded me of the night before, and I hurried to leave it behind. By the time I reached the other side, my legs felt like lead. My stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten much since the night before. I paused just long enough to drink some water and eat a protein bar, barely tasting it before shoving the wrapper back into my pack. The forest around me was silent, and the crunch of my boots on the trail felt deafening in the stillness. Remarkably, I covered the 11 miles in under 5 hours, a pace I wouldn't have thought possible under normal circumstances. When I reached my next testing site, I collapsed onto a patch of mossy ground. My chest heaved, my muscles ached, and for the first time since hearing those screams, I felt a faint sense of relief. I forced myself to get to work, taking samples and running tests with practiced efficiency. Focusing on something tangible helped steady my nerves. I analyzed the water, took tree core samples, and measured the undergrowth. My hands were steady, but my mind wasn't. The feeling of being watched had faded with the distance I'd covered, but it wasn't entirely gone. While working, I ate more jerky and trail mix to recharge, but it wasn't enough. The unease from the previous night persisted, and I felt I hadn't escaped the source of the sounds. As I packed up my equipment, I found myself glancing over my shoulder. My rational mind told me I was being paranoid, but the screams were still fresh in my memory. If I had to, I was ready to hike well into the evening, to put even more distance between me and that place. By 4 p.m., I was packed and ready. I pushed forward despite my burning legs. Some energy returned from the food. Reviewing my map, I planned my next move. The next testing site was 12 miles away, but I'd have to cross a looming mountain first. Originally, I'd planned to only climb halfway up and skirt around its side to save energy. But with time on my side, I decided to summit it instead. From the top, I'd have a clear view of the surrounding wilderness, and that extra visibility felt like the reassurance I needed. The mountain wasn't particularly steep compared to the others around it, and the 6-mile hike seemed doable before nightfall. Just barely. After double-checking my route, I set off with renewed purpose. The thought of reaching that summit and the safety it seemed to offer kept me moving forward. The hike through the forest started off straightforward, but quickly became grueling. A stream I'd expected to be narrow and easy to cross had swollen, likely from recent rain or snowmelt. Instead of flowing through a small clearing as the map suggested, it had spilled into a miniature floodplain. I had to veer north, following its edge, until I found a safe crossing. The delay was frustrating, but adapting to the wilderness is second nature after years of experience. By the time I reached the valley at the mountain's base, long shadows stretched across the ground. The sun was dipping low, casting the sky in shades of orange and gold. It was close to 7 p.m., but I pressed on. The climb was steady, the rocky terrain uneven, but manageable. My boots crunched rhythmically against the path. As I neared the summit, the last of the daylight faded, and darkness settled in. The stars began to brighten, faint at first, but growing against the deepening night. When I finally reached the top, the temperature had dropped, and the wind whispered through the rock formations. I found a spot between boulders that provided a natural windbreak. Not perfect, but good enough for the night. Setting up camp in the dark is something I'm used to. Crawling into my mummy bag felt like a welcome escape, though my stomach growled in protest. Normally, I avoid eating near my campsite to keep wildlife away, but at this elevation, I made an exception. A quick meal of trail mix and dried cheeses awaited me, calming my nerves and giving me a chance to reflect. Sitting there, overlooking the wilderness, I marveled at how far I'd come. The fear from the previous night had driven me farther than I thought possible. But now, atop this mountain, I felt peace. That peace didn't last long. Nature's call pulled me out of my warm bag, and I stepped into the cold night. As I finished my business, I looked up and froze. This time it wasn't fear that stopped me, but awe. The stars above were brilliant, brighter than I'd ever seen. The longer I stared, the more I noticed. The faint glow of the Milky Way, shooting stars streaking across the sky, constellations I hadn't thought about in years. I stood there for minutes, transfixed. Stargazing wasn't something I did often. The vastness of the sky washed away the chaos of the last 12 hours, making my fear feel distant, almost insignificant. Eventually, the cold forced me back to my tent. As I zipped into my sleeping bag and fell asleep. The next morning, I woke shivering, the wind cutting across the mountain's summit with a biting chill. My sleeping bag had done its job, but the cold seeped in regardless. As I packed up my supplies, I kept moving to stay warm, my fingers fumbling slightly as I worked against the wind. Regardless of it being summer, being up at that elevation, the wind is cold. The descent down the mountain was slow and steady. Each step required care as the terrain shifted underfoot, the rocks loose and slick from condensation. Hours later, I reached the bottom, or as mountaineers say, I had descended to the col. The forest below welcomed me with stillness, and I pulled out my map to confirm my bearings. Everything lined up. Northeast was my next destination, where another test site awaited me. But first, there was the creek I'd marked, my planned fishing spot. As I walked toward the creek, the thought of fresh trout had my stomach grumbling. Sure, I had rations, but nothing beats the taste of fish caught and cooked in the wild. I set down my pack and assembled my fishing pole, attaching a small lure, Fishing in remote areas like this, where the fish rarely encounter people, is almost a sure thing. After just a few casts, I reeled in a 12-inch trout, its silver scales shimmering in the sun. This creek was marked on my map for more than just its fish. I knew fires were permitted here. I quickly gathered dry wood and kindling and started a small flame. Using the pan I'd packed, I cooked the trout as its savory aroma filled the air. While it sizzled, I cast my line again and caught another of similar size, adding it to the pan. By the time I'd eaten, my body felt rejuvenated, the warmth of a proper meal working wonders on my spirit. After cleaning up and washing up in the creek, I packed everything carefully and set off along a deer trail that hugged the water's edge. The forest was serene, the gentle rustle of leaves and the bubbling creek my only company. Then I heard it, movement in the distance, heavy and fast. I froze. Grunting sounds followed, low and guttural. I knew right away it was a bear. Before I could decide my next move, the sound of crashing undergrowth grew louder, and I knew the bear was running towards me. My heart leapt as instinct kicked in, and I bolted off my planned path, staying close to the creek for guidance. I didn't even attempt to reach for my tranquilizer gun. My feet pounded against the ground as I ran, the adrenaline surging through me with every step. Suddenly, a loud splash erupted behind me. I didn't dare turn, thinking the bear had plunged into the creek. I kept my pace, my breath ragged, until out of nowhere, a grizzly burst through the foliage ahead. It charged right across my path, not even slowing to look at me, before vanishing into the forest on the other side. The encounter startled me so much I came to a stop, my chest heaving. But then I heard a watery noise in the creek behind me. Slowly I turned, and about 50 feet away stood something massive in the creek, a creature I'd only heard about in stories. It was enormous, easily 9 feet tall, with broad shoulders and a muscular build that seemed almost otherworldly. Its body was covered in thick, dark brown hair, matted in places, giving it a wild and untamed appearance. Its face was a strange mix of human and ape, with deep-set eyes that locked onto mine. From 50 feet away, I couldn't help but compare its size to a fully loaded wild land firefighter. I'd been close to many, obviously, but this creature dwarfed even the largest fully geared firefighter I'd ever encountered. It didn't just look bigger. It felt massive, its sheer presence radiating power. The Sasquatch didn't move. It just stood there, staring at me, as if as shocked to see me as I was to see it. I couldn't think, couldn't process. Fear, awe, and disbelief clashed in my mind, leaving me frozen in place. The Sasquatch, there was no other word for it, tilted its head slightly, as if trying to understand what I was. My senses finally kicked in, and I remembered what I'd done with the bear in Alaska. Slowly, I backed away, my eyes never leaving the creature. The wind shifted, carrying a strong, earthy smell with a coppery tang. It was pungent and distinct, a scent I instinctively knew belonged to it. I continued to back away, but my foot caught on a tangle of foliage. I stumbled, landing hard on my pack and rolling onto my chest. When I scrambled to my feet, the creature was gone. I didn't wait to see if it would return. Just like after the screams, I packed up and moved as fast as my legs could carry me. My only thought was to stick to the plan and head toward the next test site, but my pace was quicker, more frantic. And then I heard it. A scream, loud and guttural, pierced through the forest. My blood ran cold. Seconds later, another scream answered from the distance. In that moment, it all became clear. They had known I was here from the start. I wasn't just in the wilderness. I was in their territory. At the edge of the forest, I broke into a jog. descending into a narrow, elongated valley. The haunting screams echoed behind me, urging me to increase my pace. Though I had deviated from my planned route, I maintained a general sense of direction. Upon reaching the valley's end, I hastily removed my pack and retrieved my GPS device. I discovered I was roughly half a mile off course. Consulting my map, I identified the correct direction to rejoin my intended path. I pressed on until late evening, finally arriving at the next testing site. Exhausted, I set up my tent and immediately fell into a deep sleep. The following morning, I awoke as usual, lying in my tent and reflecting logically on my recent experiences. I knew what I had seen and heard. Requesting an early extraction would only necessitate a return trip later in the month or the deployment of another researcher in my place. I had several extraction points marked on my map for emergencies, the nearest being a day's hike north along an old service road. However, I dismissed the idea and resolved to proceed to the next site, located directly east, reasoning that increased distance would provide a sense of security. After eating breakfast, I performed the necessary tests, packed up, and set off once more. The next site was 10 miles away, situated at a lower elevation, necessitating a descent. Maintaining a brisk pace, I crested a small hill and encountered the only road in this wilderness, a seldom used route in poor condition. The road served as a boundary between two wilderness areas. Its deteriorated state explained why the emergency extraction point was located further north. Crossing the road into the Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness, I began my descent toward the next area. The boundary followed natural geological formations, clearly demarcated by the terrain. The descent was gradual, with elevation dropping from 6,000 feet near Dagger Creek to around 4,000 feet in the lower regions. I started my descent. The landscape began to change subtly. The dense forest gave way to open meadows, the ground underfoot becoming rockier. The sun climbed higher in the sky, its warmth a welcome respite from the cool morning air. Despite the challenging descent, I welcomed the warmth and change. I arrived at my next testing site just as the sun dipped below the horizon. Exhausted but relieved, I set up my equipment and performed the necessary tests by the dim light of my headlamp. As soon as everything was packed away, I climbed into my tent and fell asleep almost immediately, grateful for the quiet. The following 2 nights were similarly uneventful. I allowed myself to slow my pace, taking time to rest, fish, and enjoy the meals I prepared. The fresh trout was plentiful and delicious, and for a brief moment, I almost felt at peace in the wilderness. It was a rare reprieve, but I knew better than to let my guard down completely. The testing sites I visited didn't follow any obvious course or pattern. They seemed scattered across the wilderness, chosen to sample different types of vegetation and terrain. If I had to describe their arrangement, it was like tracing a jagged backward sea across the region. I continued southward, marking my progress as I worked my way toward the next site. One morning, after a quiet night, I packed up and headed to a testing location only 4 miles away. It seemed like an easy day's hike, and after fishing for breakfast, I felt ready to tackle the trail. I hugged the tree line of the mountain I needed to navigate around, confident that the steep drop-off on my map would be passable if I skirted along its side. But as I rounded the bend, it became clear that wasn't an option. The sheer cliffs dropped sharply into the valley below, far more dangerous than I had anticipated. Frustration set in as I checked my map again. The only options were to double back, descend, or ascend and go over the mountain. Descending looked equally treacherous, and I was tired of backtracking, so I chose the upward climb. The ascent took longer than expected, each step testing my stamina as the loose rocks and uneven ground slowed my progress. Finally, after several hours, I crested the peak and began my descent, relieved to find a flat clearing where I could take a much-needed break. As I caught my breath, the wind shifted, carrying with it a low, haunting sound. At first, I thought it was the wind itself, but then I heard it again, distinct, mournful howls echoing through the valley below. Wolves. Normally, wolves wouldn't concern me. They're shy of humans and tend to avoid confrontation unless provoked. Still, the sound sent a chill down my spine. Curious, I pulled out my binoculars and scanned the valley. It didn't take long to spot the pack, about 8 wolves clustered around a downed elk. They tore into the carcass, but something felt off. One wolf stood apart from the others, its sheer size dwarfing the rest of the pack. Its posture was wrong, almost unnatural, and the way it ate seemed off. I couldn't look away. The massive wolf's fur was a dark coat blending into the shadows around it. My hair stood on end as I realized how unnatural it looked. It wasn't just its size, twice that of any wolf I'd seen, but something about its presence that unnerved me. A freak of nature, I told myself, though the thought did little to calm me. I know wolves' hunting range likely stretched over a vast area. There was no way to avoid the entire range, but I could alter my route to steer clear of the pack. Skirting the base of the mountains seemed the safest option, keeping me out of their sight and scent. I marked a new path on my map, adding roughly 5 miles to my journey, enough to keep a wide berth while still reaching the next testing site. With my route adjusted, I packed up and set off again. Even with my precautions, the thought of that massive wolf and its unnatural presence left me feeling exposed. I skirted around the base of the mountains, keeping the jagged cliffs to my right as I made my way to the testing site. The climb down into the valley where the site was located was steep but manageable, and I performed the necessary tests almost mechanically. The routine of sampling and recording providing was again a welcome distraction. Once I was done, I retraced my steps back to the base of the mountain and began heading south, pushing the lingering thoughts from my mind. That evening I made camp earlier than usual near a creek, knowing that the trail ahead would be more treacherous. The hours of light left were spent preparing gear and eating a simple meal before crawling into my tent. The wind outside was lulled me into a deep, dreamless sleep, eager to rise early and tackle the day. At first light, I woke to the sound of the babbling creek and wind on my tent. I fished for my breakfast, catching a decent-sized trout that I quickly fried up. As I ate, a noise carried faintly on the wind. I froze, my mind jumping immediately to the bear from before. The sound stopped almost as soon as it started, but it wasn't the shuffling or grunting of a bear. It was different, quieter, deliberate. My thoughts flickered back to the Sasquatch I'd seen, and I couldn't shake the idea that I might not be alone. A cold sweat spread across my back, making me shiver despite the warmth of the morning sun. I hurried to clean my pan and doused the fire with water from the creek. My movements were fast but methodical. I packed quickly, all the while scanning the tree line for any signs of movement. When I turned to grab my pack, I saw it. Sitting across the creek, less than 30 feet away, was that massive black wolf, crouched down staring at me. It was enormous, easily twice the size of a normal wolf, with a body a little bigger than a fully grown black bear, and a head that seemed too large for its neck. Its sheer size was staggering, like seeing an NFL lineman next to an average person. But this was no football player. Its eyes glowed with an eerie orange light, unnatural and mesmerizing. And for a moment, I couldn't move. My hands were on my pack, and I felt the tranquilizer gun. My fingers closed around it as I calculated my options. This thing wasn't normal, and I knew one dart wouldn't be enough to bring it down. Slowly, I maneuvered my pack so I could slide it onto my back while keeping the tranquilizer gun at the ready. The wolf didn't move. It just stared at me, its posture wrong for any animal I'd ever seen. Its front paws seemed almost hand-like, and the way it sat was unnervingly different. My eyes locked on its ears, which twitched and pivoted as if picking up sounds I couldn't hear. The longer I looked, the more I noticed how alien it seemed, like a grotesque mockery of a wolf. I whispered softly, repeating the same calming words I'd used with the bear in Alaska. "I'm backing up. I'm leaving. Easy now." My voice was steady, but my heart pounded in my chest. As I took a step backward, the creature did something that shattered every assumption I had about what I was looking at. It stood up, like it was natural, not like a dog rearing onto its hind legs, but upright, like a human. Its arms hung low by its sides, the claws at the tips of its fingers glinting in the early light. Its head tilted slightly, watching me, its eyes unblinking. I felt my body betray me in that moment. I hate to admit, but I soiled myself. Fear, shock, disbelief, they all hit me at once. I whispered to myself, "This is it. I'm not getting out of here." The creature didn't charge. It just stared, its head cocking slightly to one side, as if curious. Its torso was long, with thick muscles rippling beneath its blotchy fur. Its legs were shorter but looked powerful, and its arms hung down past its hips. The triangular ears on its head flicked occasionally, like it was still listening to the forest around us. It looked like a Hollywood werewolf, but Hollywood had gotten their look all wrong. Nothing in any movie I have ever seen came close to looking like this creature. It was absolutely terrifying and mystifying all at the same time. I don't know how long we stood there, locked in this silent standoff. It felt like an eternity. Finally, I shifted my weight, and the creature's head snapped down, its orange eyes locking onto the movement. My instinct screamed at me to act, and in one fluid motion, I raised the tranquilizer gun and fired. The darts hit it, but the wolf barely flinched. I fired again, unloading everything I had into the creature before turning and running. Behind me, I heard it crashing through the underbrush, its heavy footfalls tearing up the forest floor. It was fast, too fast. I could hear it gaining on me, the sound of branches snapping and vegetation being crushed beneath its weight. I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning with the effort. Then, the noises began to fade. I dared a glance over my shoulder and saw nothing. The darts worked. I didn't stop running until the forest fell silent again, the only sound my ragged breathing. Whatever that thing was, it had stopped chasing me. For now. I stopped for the briefest of moments, slinging my pack off and reloading my tranquilizer gun. I also retrieved my firearm, changed into new pants, and secured its holster to my belt. As I stood there, the weight of fear crashed over me, leaving me trembling and sobbing. A thought crossed my mind. What the hell is in these woods, out in the middle of Idaho? First a Sasquatch, and now a werewolf-looking thing. Just what is lurking in these mountains? The treacherous hike ahead involved ascending a significant elevation, nearly 3,500 feet over a short distance. This section of the wilderness is known for its steep, rugged mountains and deep canyons. I knew there were only two ways out of this area: back the way I came or this insane ascent. For now, the ascent was my only option. After arming myself and reloading the tranquilizer gun, I donned my climbing gloves and attached grips to my boots, just in case. My sole comfort was the thought that the creature might be asleep somewhere behind me, and I doubted it could follow me up the steep embankment. After making the arduous trek up the steep embankment, a journey that took several grueling hours, I removed my climbing gear and pressed on. This part of the trail was one I had been looking forward to and wanted to take my time on, as it was noted to be part of the original Lewis and Clark exploratory routes. Lewis and Clark had avoided the Salmon River, deeming it too treacherous, which is why it's known as the River of No Return, and now I wouldn't have the chance to enjoy it. The next testing site was 12 miles southwest. At my usual pace, I could reach it, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to proceed. Uncertainty clouded my thoughts, but I knew that heading that way led to an exit route I had planned, potentially bringing me back to the road dividing the wilderness areas. I reached the testing site by 5 p.m. Thinking rationally, I told myself, I'm here. I haven't heard anything, so I'll do the test. I completed the procedures, albeit hastily, in under an hour, and set off again. I disliked rushing through tests, but circumstances demanded it. Continuing southwest, I approached a shallow gorge with a swift river below, where I had planned to set up camp and fish the following morning. I was ahead of schedule and didn't want to stop. Since sleeping atop a mountain had previously provided a good vantage point of my surroundings, I decided to do it again. Without consulting my map, I chose the nearest mountain by sight and began my ascent. By late evening, I had broken through the tree line and neared the summit. I paused to survey my surroundings, and by dusk, I had reached the top. I found a suitable spot behind a fallen rock formation that would serve as a windbreak and made camp. Rummaging through my pack, I ate a granola bar and some dried cheese. Exhaustion from the day's elevation gains left me nearly delirious. My legs felt like jello, yet simultaneously as if they'd been stung by 1,000 bees. As I lay there, my legs grateful for the rest, I fell asleep. I woke to the sound of fierce winds rattling my tent and the piercing whistles of gusts slicing through the night. Drops of rain pelted the fabric in uneven bursts, and then, crack, an ear-splitting clap of thunder shook the mountain. I froze, gripping my sleeping bag, as flashes of lightning illuminated the tent for split seconds at a time. The storm had settled directly over the mountaintop, and I was trapped within it. Unzipping the tent cautiously, I peered outside and was greeted by a thick mist swirling in every direction. The clouds had descended, encasing the summit in a damp, ghostly shroud. Lightning danced in the mist, its bright flashes accompanied by deafening rumbles that reverberated through my chest. The rain wasn't falling so much as floating, carried sideways by relentless gusts. It felt as though the storm had swallowed the mountain, and I was at its mercy. For over 40 minutes, chaos reigned. The wind howled through the rock formations I had sheltered behind, breaking apart in high-pitched whistles. My tent buckled under the force, and every nerve in my body was taut, anticipating collapse. I checked my watch, 1:36 a.m. The storm ragging and the constant pounding of rain soaked everything in its wake. But then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the wind started to die down. By 2 a.m., the storm had moved on, leaving the mountain drenched and eerily still. I stepped out of my tent, squinting into the damp air. The storm was retreating into the distance, its remnants flickering as lightning lit up distant clouds. The rain-soaked world around me glistened faintly under the weak light of the stars breaking through the mist. The air carried that unmistakable fresh scent of rain, sharp and earthy, and for a moment I let myself breathe in deeply, relieved to have survived the storm. Then I saw them, lights glowing faintly in the tree line below. My stomach dropped as I stared, trying to process what I was seeing. The lights weren't flickering like campfires or flashlights. They were steady, spherical, and unnatural. I fumbled back into my tent, digging for my flashlight and binoculars. Grabbing them, I moved to the edge of the rocky summit and trained my binoculars on the lights. What I saw made my blood run cold. The lights weren't camping lanterns or headlamps. They were high up in the trees, like glowing orbs hovering in the darkness. My breath hitched, and I muttered aloud, "No, no way." A tremor crept into my voice. It has to be that creature, that thing, that werewolf. Panic gripped me as the reality of my situation sank in. I was trapped on this drenched mountaintop, with nowhere to run. These steep, slippery slopes were a death sentence in the dark, but staying put felt like waiting for my doom. If it came for me, there would be no escape. Back in the tent, I armed myself with both the tranquilizer gun and my firearm, and my shaking hands reached for the satellite phone. Pressing the call button, I whispered, "Please answer." After a few rings, a groggy voice came through. "Rick," Carl said, half asleep. "Are you okay?" "Alive," I replied, my voice shaky. "If that's what you mean, but I don't know for how long." "What do you mean?" Carl's tone shifted, waking fully now. "I'm being hunted," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "There's this massive wolf. No, I don't know what it is. It's been trailing me since this morning. I hit it with 4 tranquilizer darts earlier, climbed 6,000 feet, and it's still following me." "Wait," Carl said. "Where are you now?" "Top of the mountain near," I gave the location, "where I set up camp. This morning I was down in the valley near one of the lowest testing spots. Now I'm at the summit." "It's 2 a.m. where you are," Carl pointed out. "How do you even know it's still out there? It's pitch black." "I shine," I said grimly. "I'm looking down the mountain. Its eyes are glowing from the tree line." Then came a howl, long and mournful, rising from the valley. It was deep and resonant, unlike anything I'd heard before. "Did you hear that, Carl?" I whispered urgently. "No," he said. "I didn't hear anything." "It's howling," I muttered, the words barely audible. "Rick, calm down," Carl said firmly. "You're armed, right? Stand your ground. If it comes close, tranquilize it, then shoot if you have to." "That might work," I said, my voice cracking. "But this thing is the size of a black bear. And Carl, I swear, this morning it stood up, not like a dog, like a man." Carl went silent for a moment after I told him the creature had stood up like a man. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, probably trying to process what I'd just said. Finally, his voice came through, cautious but calm. "Rick, are you absolutely sure about what you saw? I mean, you've been under a lot of stress, and you're out there alone. It's not impossible for your mind to play tricks on you." "I know what I saw, Carl," I said sharply. "This thing isn't normal. It's not just a big wolf. It stood up, Carl, like a human. Its arms hung by its sides, its head tilted like it was thinking. And those eyes, they're not right. They glow orange. I'm telling you, this isn't my imagination." Another pause. Then Carl's tone shifted, becoming more serious. "Okay, Rick, listen to me. If you're certain about this, if you really believe you're in danger, I can start the extraction process. You know it'll take hours to get anyone out to where you are, but I can make the call." I hesitated, gripping the phone tightly. And what if it doesn't wait? What if this thing comes for me before anyone can get here? That's why I need you to stay calm, Carl said firmly. You've got your weapons, right? If it gets close, you have a plan. You're smart, Rick. You've handled worse situations before. Just think about it logically. But if you need to get out, say the word, and I'll make it happen. I swallowed hard. Just be ready, Carl. If I call again, it might mean I don't have much time. I'll stay by the phone, he said without hesitation. You're not alone, Rick. Just hang in there. The wind had settled, leaving an eerie stillness over the mountain. My tent, still damp from the storm, clung to me like a second skin as I lay inside, gripping the tranquilizer gun with one hand and the firearm with the other. Every nerve in my body was on edge. The memory of those glowing eyes burned into my mind. I tried to convince myself it wouldn't come. It had to be miles away, recovering from the tranquilizer darts. But in the back of my mind, I knew better. Then I heard it. A branch snapped somewhere down the slope. The sound wasn't loud, but in the silence of the mountain, it may as well have been a gunshot. My breathing quickened, each shallow inhale shaking as my chest tightened. Slowly, I moved to unzip the tent just a fraction, peering into the darkness outside. The stars had reemerged, casting faint light across the landscape, but the shadows between the rocks and trees below were impenetrable. Another sound, this time closer, heavy, deliberate steps crunching against the damp earth. My grip tightened around the tranquilizer gun. I forced myself to breathe, whispering under my breath, "Follow the plan, Rick. Stick to the plan." A low growl rolled through the night, deep and guttural, sending a jolt of adrenaline through me. It came from just beyond the windbreak, where the boulders gave way to a narrow path down the mountain. My stomach turned as I realized it was already here. Suddenly, a shadow moved. It was subtle at first, blending seamlessly with the night. But as it stepped into the starlight, my worst fears were confirmed. The werewolf had found me. Its form was massive, towering at least 8 feet tall as it stood upright, its long arms hanging low by its sides. The damp fur clung to its muscular frame, and its head swiveled slightly, ears twitching as it scanned the area. Those orange eyes glowed faintly in the dark, locking onto my tent with unerring precision. I swallowed hard, every muscle in my body screaming to run, but I stayed rooted to the spot. The plan. I had to follow the plan. Slowly, I positioned myself, steadying the tranquilizer gun toward the tent opening. My hand shook as I raised the barrel, but I forced it to steady. The creature took a step closer, its claws scraping against the rocks. It let out a low, rumbling growl, its breath visible in the cool night air. I could see its nostrils flare, sniffing the damp scent of rain-soaked earth. And me. I whispered again, barely audible. "I'm backing up. I'm leaving." But this time it wasn't like Alaska. This thing didn't seem curious or cautious. It was a predator, and I was its prey. When it took another step, closer still, I didn't wait. I squeezed the trigger, the dart firing with a soft "ft." The tranquilizer struck its shoulder, and the creature flinched, letting out a snarl that echoed across the mountaintop. I didn't hesitate, firing again and again until I emptied the chamber. For a moment, it staggered, shaking its head as if trying to rid itself of the darts. My heart leapt with hope. Maybe it would work. Maybe this thing could finally be stopped. But then it straightened, its gaze locking onto me with an intensity that sent ice through my veins. I scrambled to switch to the firearm, fumbling as it advanced. Just as it closed the distance to mere feet, I fired, the sharp crack of the gunshot tearing through the night. The creature let out a furious roar, a sound so primal it felt like it shook the very ground beneath me. It staggered back, its claws clutching at its side where the bullet had struck. For a moment, I thought it might fall, but instead, it let out one final enraged howl before turning and disappearing into the darkness. I sat there trembling, the gun still raised in my shaking hands. My breath came in ragged gasps as I scanned the shadows, waiting for it to reappear. But it didn't. The mountain fell silent again, save for the pounding of my heart. I called Carl back, and voice shaking, explained what had happened. When he asked if I wanted out, I didn't hesitate this time. After some back and forth, we settled on an extraction point nearly 30 miles northeast, just off the dividing road. The only alternative was 32 miles southeast, deeper into the wilderness, and I wasn't about to push my luck. I agreed, though the thought of covering that distance with the memory of glowing eyes in my mind left me uneasy. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my back against the rock, weapons in hand, staring into the shadows and waiting for the sun to rise. Traveling that far wouldn't be quick. At my best pace, I could manage about 15 miles a day, even with the rugged terrain slowing me down. That meant at least 2 days to reach the road and head north to the extraction point. The first leg, 10 miles east of the road, would be grueling, descending steep, muddy slopes still soaked from the storm. The second leg, 20 miles north on the road, might be easier physically, but it would leave me exposed. The road's condition was rough, and it wound through open stretches that offered little cover if that werewolf was still following me. At sunrise, I broke camp quickly, the events of the night urging me to move. The air was cool and damp. The ground was still slick from the storm, but I didn't waste time. With my pack secured and weapons within easy reach, I set off toward the dividing road. The descent eastward was steep and treacherous, every step requiring focus to avoid slipping on the wet terrain. By midday, I reached the road, a rough, rutted path winding through the wilderness, and turned north, pushing myself hard. The miles blurred together as I hiked relentlessly, my legs aching and my throat dry despite rationing water. When the sun dipped low, casting long shadows, I checked my map. I'd made it 17 miles. Exhausted, I set up camp in a small clearing just off the road, hoping the night would offer me a chance to rest. The night passed uneventfully, a welcome relief after the chaos of the last few days. I kept my weapons close and my ears attuned to every rustle and creak in the forest, but nothing came. When dawn broke, I felt a faint glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I'd left the horrors behind. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, I called Carl. We confirmed the extraction time, the plan falling into place with a sense of finality. I packed up my gear quickly, the thought of finally leaving this wilderness driving me forward. But just as I was about to shoulder my pack, the sound hit me. Those same horrific screams, deep and guttural, echoing through the trees. My blood ran cold as another scream followed, closer this time. Then, the unmistakable sound of rocks tumbling. One landed with a heavy thud just a few feet from my pack, sending a spray of dirt into the air. I froze, heart pounding. Grabbing my pack and weapons, I bolted, barely taking the time to secure my gear. The scream ripped through the air again, closer, louder, almost deafening. I turned, and from the edge of the tree line, it emerged. The Sasquatch. Its massive frame, easily 9 feet tall, was backlit by the morning sun, its matted hair glistening with dew. It bellowed another horrific scream, its broad chest heaving with each exhale, and then it charged. I ran, my pack bouncing on my back as the ground blurred beneath my feet. The sound of its heavy footsteps thundering behind me was relentless, each one accompanied by the snapping of branches and the crunch of rocks. I reached for my tranquilizer gun, fumbling to pull it free as I veered off the road into the underbrush. The Sasquatch was gaining. I could hear its breath, ragged and furious, like a locomotive bearing down on me. I turned, skidding to a stop just long enough to fire. The first dart hit its shoulder, but it didn't even flinch. I fired again, then again, each shot connecting as it barreled forward. The fourth dart hit, and for a moment, it staggered, slowing just enough for me to create some distance. But it didn't stop. The creature kept coming, albeit slower now, its movements more erratic. I pushed myself harder, lungs burning, legs screaming in protest. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard it collapse behind me with a heavy thud. I turned, breathless and shaking, to see it sprawled on the ground, its massive chest rising and falling in labored breaths as the tranquilizers finally took hold. For a moment, I stood frozen, staring at the creature. It was otherworldly, its sheer size and presence overwhelming. The rational part of me screamed to keep running, but another part, curiosity perhaps, made me reach for my camera. I fumbled with my pack, pulling it free, when a movement in the trees caught my eye. The second Sasquatch emerged, this one smaller but no less terrifying. Its scream was sharper and filled with rage. It charged without hesitation. I bolted again, clutching the tranquilizer gun as I stumbled over a root. My knees hit the ground hard, but I scrambled to reload as the creature closed the gap. My hand trembled as I fired. The dart struck it in the chest, but it didn't stop. I fired again, barely taking the time to aim. The second dart hit, and then the third. Jumping to feet, I moved and fired the final dart nearly at point blank, and it staggered, its momentum carrying it past me before it crashed to the ground, its movements slow as it was trying to get up. It groaned as if sleepy. Panting and shaking, I didn't wait to see. I took off, my mind screaming one thing: run. As I stumbled back onto the road, I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see another Sasquatch tearing through the underbrush behind me. Instead, I saw the one in the distance, barely visible through the trees. It swayed unsteadily, the effects of the tranquilizers heavy on it, and then it collapsed in a heap. My legs burned as I pushed forward, every step taking me farther from that nightmare. The road stretched endlessly ahead, winding through the dense forest, but I knew I had to keep moving. I kept my pace steady, forcing myself not to look back, the sound of my boots pounding the dirt road blending with my labored breathing. The weight of my pack felt like it doubled, but I didn't dare stop. The trees began to thin, and a distant hum broke through the forest's oppressive quiet. I realized with a jolt I was close, just a few more miles to the extraction site. The faint hum grew louder, and then I saw it, the plane circling low above the treetops, its metallic glint shining in the late morning sun. Relief flooded through me as it descended toward the clearing. I saw its wheels touching down on the rough, open terrain I needed to reach. About a half-mile to go, then I heard it screaming off in the distance. At this point, my legs were a knotted mess, and it looked like I was limping and running. Coming down the small embankment, I could see the pilot open his door. Another scream rang out as I moved into the open field and ran towards the plane. I heard something crashing behind me, and the pilot turned to finally realize I was close. I could see a look of bewilderment on his face when I approached the plane. The pilot didn't acknowledge me, but steered past me, so I turned and saw the massive Sasquatch. The first I had tranquilized standing on the edge of the clearing. It let out one last horrific scream before turning and disappearing into the woods. I tried to explain to the pilot, but all he said was, "I know now why you called for extraction." It was nothing but relief for my legs after that. I opted for prorated pay and had another finish the samples, which took place in late August. Their trip was successful as far as I know. Now, after researching things, I am sure that werewolf was a dogman. All I know is I don't ever want to return that part of Idaho again. I plan on keeping up doing this, but maybe I should be more careful before just accepting any job blindly without researching more on the potential different animals that could be out there. The Shapeshifter, from Diana0805. I live in a small city in Spain. I was lucky enough to grow up next to the mountains with lush forest, and I used to spend my time playing there as a kid. I loved being in nature. The woods gave me a sense of peace that I couldn't find anywhere else. Along the years, things had happened. Nothing scary, but strange for sure. It all started when I was about 9 or 10 years old. I started noticing strange footprints that suddenly changed from human to animal. Of course, nobody believed me. Everyone knows how active a child's imagination can be. At 14, I got my first dog, and loving the woods so much, of course, I had to walk him there. It was the perfect place to do so. Soon, I started hearing someone who whistled to my dog, but never allowed me to see them. Every time my dog heard it, he became excited and ran away from me to play with someone deep in the woods. Sometimes I could hear them and even see my dog playing with what I supposed was the other person's dog. I never saw anybody else, just their dog, but the whistle was unmistakably human. I recall a boy's voice calling his name once. My sister was with me that day, and she asked me about it, but even though I always thought it was strange, I was never afraid. I used to joke about my dog and his werewolf friend, and that's what I told my sister. Then one day, I remember it was a summer day. I was 15 or so, and I was walking my dog when suddenly he disappeared. I couldn't find him anywhere, and I was really scared. I came back home to check if he had come back before me, but he wasn't there. I was more and more upset every single moment, and I headed back to the woods to keep looking for him. I remember calling his name over and over. Then suddenly I heard a noise, and as I turned my head to check, I saw the shadow of a boy. But as I was looking at it, trying to decide where he can be, I saw it change. The boy's arms began to grow longer and longer while his back twisted. I could only watch in awe. I knew who he was, and I wasn't scared. The shift ended, and what moments ago was the shadow of a boy was now the shadow of a big dog or a wolf. He wanted me to know he was there, but he didn't want me to know his human self, and I kind of understood. I asked him to help me find my dog. I said something like, "Please find him and tell him I'm waiting for him here." 10 minutes later, my dog came back. A huge black wolf was next to him. The wolf looked at me right into my eyes. His eyes were green and blue. They looked so human. I bowed my head at him, murmuring, "Thank you." The huge creature bowed his head in return and left. I put the leash back on my dog, and we came back home. Over the years, I've seen him several times. I don't know what it is, a werewolf, a shapeshifter, but he can change at will, and he's not mean. 20 years later, I still walk my dog, this one is a female, in those woods, and I keep looking for him every single walk. I just hope I can someday learn his secrets, even though I have to keep them to myself. The Aurora Borealis, from Stella Sorensen. A few months ago, when the aurora borealis was predicted to be visible in the vicinity of around where I live, I decided it would be fun to go on a small road trip with my cousin and aunt. We got ready at their house and set off at around 12:30 a.m. The car ride felt longer than it was. We entertained ourselves by listening to music. The drive was surrounded by mountains of tumbleweed and rocks. Think of no civilization for miles. I love heading out there, even now. This setting was perfect for seeing the aurora borealis. We were around the southwestern part of Idaho, dipping into northern Nevada. The weather was warm, but a slight breeze provided a colder feel, and the pitch blackness outside added to the eerie ambiance. Although we had explored various locations in the area, including camping out there, staying overnight in my aunt's car, searching for extraterrestrial life forms, hiking, exploring caves, and thrifting in a small town that is quite a bit out, my aunt was somewhat familiar with the surroundings. In contrast, my cousin and I are not exactly familiar with navigating around this area because we rarely use maps or any other navigational aids. We had been out there many times, us three. Finally, at around 2:30 a.m., we arrived at a suitable location where we could pull over. My cousin had fallen asleep, leaving me and my aunt alone in the car. We were parked on the side of the road, adjacent to a cutoff, where half of the car, the side my cousin had been sitting on in the front left, faced the cliff on the side of the road. The side I was riding on, the right back seat, was oriented towards the road. I was seated behind the driver's seat. After being out there for a couple of minutes taking photos, we began to hear a noise. It slowly faded in and got louder the longer we were out there. It was like someone was trying to hum a song, but they had never heard one. The sound sounded like a man but a woman at the same time. I struggled to describe it accurately, but it eerily evoked a sense of familiarity, though I couldn't pinpoint its origin. The noise seemed to come from my cousin's side of the car, which was unsettling. My aunt initially assumed that I was the source of the sound, prompting her to repeatedly ask, "What?" However, I was confused, because I believed she was the one making the noise. When she heard me respond with, "What?" at the same time as she heard the noise, she told me to get into the car immediately. She drove away while my car door remained open, and my leg dangled out of the door as she sped off. Whatever was making that noise was clearly not an animal or a human. In that area of Idaho, Nevada, it is said that there are small humanoid creatures that prey on humans, called the Nemeragar. It is said that sometimes they sing, and it echoes through the mountains. My only problem with this theory is that this legend is located in a completely different area in Idaho. If you look up something along the lines of Nemeragar Idaho dwarfs, you can learn more about this subject, but it's up to you to form your own opinion of the phenomenon. Though my aunt has stated she thinks it's a skinwalker, my cousin thinks we are being dramatic and stated that it was probably just an animal. The more I think about the story, the more unsure I am about what it could have possibly been. Monster in the Woods, from Anonymous. My cousin and I were about 12 years old when we had one of the strangest and most unnerving experiences of our lives. Even now, years later, we still talk about it, wondering what exactly we saw that day. It was a warm afternoon, one of those midsummer days where the heat made the air heavy and the woods behind our house felt like a perfect escape. We spent a lot of time there, carving things out of wood, building forts, and pretending we were explorers. That day we had an idea. Why not build a small crossbow? We had our knives, some duct tape, a rubber band, and plenty of wood. It seemed like a fun challenge. We spent what felt like hours carving, adjusting, and finally piecing together a rough version of a crossbow. It wasn't anything fancy, just something we threw together using what we had. Finally, it was time to test it out. I told my cousin to stand still so I could see if it worked. On the count of 3, I fired a small wooden bolt we had carved. To our surprise, it worked. Too well. The bolt shot straight into his calf, and a small piece of wood broke off in his leg. Panic set in immediately. We knew we couldn't tell our moms, or we'd be in serious trouble. So, in typical 12-year-old fashion, we decided to take matters into our own hands. With a mix of nerves and adrenaline, we dug the splinter out using one of our knives. It wasn't as deep as we first thought, and the bleeding was minimal, but it left us both shaken. After a few minutes of laughing it off and checking to make sure he was okay, we turned our attention back to making more bolts, talking about soccer, and trying to ignore what had just happened. That's when something strange happened. To our left, not far from where we were sitting, there was a tree. It was about 20 feet away, just a normal tree among dozens of others in the dense woods. Without warning, it started to shake violently. Not just a little swaying from the wind. This was different. It rocked back and forth as if something massive was gripping it and shaking it with force. At first, we thought it was a bear. The woods weren't exactly known for big predators, but it wasn't impossible. Then we heard the sound. It was deep, guttural, and loud. A roar unlike anything I'd ever heard. Not the growl of a bear or the cry of any animal I recognized. It sounded almost unnatural, like something was in pain or angry. We both froze, staring at the tree. The shaking continued for a few more seconds, and then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The woods around us were silent. No rustling leaves, no chirping birds, just an eerie, empty stillness. We expected to see something. A bear, a person, anything that could explain what we had just witnessed. But there was nothing. The tree stood still now, looking no different from any other tree in the area. There were no signs of an animal, no footprints, no movement. Just that lingering sense of something being very, very wrong. We didn't need to say anything to each other. We took off running, bolting through the woods, our unfinished crossbow and wooden bolts forgotten in the dirt. We didn't stop until we were back at the house, panting and out of breath. Our moms took one look at us, confused by how panicked we looked. We tried to explain, but they didn't believe us. "It was probably just the wind," my mom said, brushing it off. "Or maybe a deer spooked you." But we knew better. There was no wind strong enough to shake a single tree like that while leaving the others completely still. And that sound, we never heard anything like it before or since. For years, we avoided that particular part of the woods. We still ventured out there, but something about that area felt wrong. It was like the air was heavier, like we were being watched. We never saw the tree move again, never heard that sound, but the memory of that day stuck with us. Now, as adults, we've tried to rationalize what we saw. Was it some kind of animal we didn't recognize? A trick of the wind? Maybe even something supernatural? We've gone back to the spot a few times, hoping for some kind of clue, but nothing ever happens. The tree still stands, looking no different from any other, as if nothing ever occurred there. Maybe we'll never know what it was. Maybe it was just a one-time thing, something that we weren't meant to understand. But I do know one thing for sure. We weren't imagining it. Whatever happened that day in the woods was real, and it still sends a chill down my spine just thinking about it. Skinwalker? Mimic? From Gorgamus the Great. My name is Sid, name changed for privacy reasons. I'm 6 feet 7 inches, light-skinned, and have long curly hair. I live alone with 3 dogs, 2 large Mastiff Cane Corso Boxer Amstaff crosses, named Diego and Rocket, and a black pug named Boogie in a house that backs onto a forest. I decided to walk the dogs on a favorite trail that I liked. So I put the collars on the dogs and started walking. The weather was really nice. The sun was out, and the sky was devoid of clouds. There was also a slight breeze. Then, suddenly, the Mastiff crosses Diego, and Rocket stopped walking, and they started listening for the slightest noise. Then there was a loud crashing noise, and Diego and Rocket went crazy, barking and growling. I got pulled to the ground and dragged a few feet, and Boogie's lead got caught too, and he got flung also. So I picked myself up and scolded Diego and Rocket for their bad behavior before brushing myself off. I made sure that Boogie was not hurt from being flung. We continued down the trail until we found a large pond, and I let the dogs off. Diego and Rocket jumped into the water and started swimming out to the middle, while Boogie ran back and forth on the shore barking. An hour passed, and I called Diego and Rocket back as it became late afternoon. So we headed back the way we came. The slight breeze hissed between the trees, but there were no birds calling this time. I got the feeling that I was being watched by something. I didn't think much of it, and we continued. It was dusk when we got home, so I unlocked the house and let the dogs inside. Their automatic food dispensers had already filled up their bowls. I, on the other hand, heated up a bowl of spaghetti bolognese and started eating it. After I swallowed down the last big mouthful, I washed my bowl. I sat down on my bed to play NBA 2K22 to let my stomach churn and digest my big meal. Then Diego, Rocket, and Boogie came into my room. I stopped my game and took them outside. Diego and Rocket did their business, but where's Boogie? I thought he followed me out. "Boogie!" I yelled. Panic started to fill me from losing Boogie. Then again, my large Mastiff crosses Diego, and Rocket stopped and turned to face the forest. They were intensely staring into the darkness, staring at someone or something. My fear increased for Boogie's safety now. Then Diego and Rocket advanced slowly forward, letting out a long, deep growl, still staring into the darkness. Then I heard a noise behind me and saw a very scared Boogie scratching at the door, begging to be let inside. I called the other two and ran back to the house. As I reached the steps, I heard the most disturbing thing ever. A loud, distorted, drawn-out wailing "Boogie!" that echoed through the forest like someone or something was trying to mimic my voice. I rushed inside and shut the door. I ran into my room with the dogs and shut the door. Then I heard something big stomping up the steps, and when it reached the door, it started to aggressively bang and scratch the door, making distorted childlike laughing before losing interest and stomping back down the stairs. I still live in that same house with the dogs, but boy, I can't get that distorted voice out of my head. Crazy people on my camping trip, from Kakarot Killer Broly. This story happened over 10 years ago, but it still terrifies me to this day. I was 17 when this happened. I went on a camping trip with some of my friends and my girlfriend. When we got the tents and campfire set up, it was already getting dark outside, so we had a fire, telling jokes and stories. My friends went to bed while me and my girlfriend were heading to our tent. We were making out when we heard footsteps outside of our tent. I instantly thought, "John?" But then I heard him snoring in the tent next to ours. I looked outside the tent and saw 2 to 3 men standing near the fire pit. I closed the tent flap and whispered in her ear, "There are 2 or 3 guys near the fire pit." She got frightened by what I told her. I texted my friends. They all responded. I told them all, and we all agreed that we would confront them. It was 8 versus 3 at most, so we did. They were average-sized guys, and there were 3 of them in total. The one in the back was holding something. It looked like an axe. We were talking to them when I heard my girlfriend screaming. We turned to look, and there was another guy dragging her out of the tent. I ran and knocked him off his feet. He got up, and it turned into a huge brawl. They were outnumbered and outskilled, as we went to martial art classes 4 times a week. When we had them beaten, we ran to our cars. But before we could, one of them grabbed a large knife, and my girlfriend was running past him when he grabbed her by the ankle and cut into her calf. The friend that was the closest kicked him in the face, grabbed her, and she wrapped her arm around me as I brought her to the car. I took her to a hospital while the others went home. We are all still friends to this day, but I wonder what would have happened if me and my girlfriend went to sleep that night. The Smiling Dog, from Taco Dog. Hello, my name is Raina, and here's my story. One day, me and my friend Ella decided we would go exploring in the woods, and she didn't like the woods as much as me. We were wanting to find a place to camp. A few hours later, we were setting up camp and had found the perfect place. My friend Ella had a very uneasy feeling, but she shrugged it off. So did I. Later that evening, we started off to find firewood. My friend Ella told me that she didn't feel right. Of course, I told her that we are still going to get the wood. My brother had called me at the time and asked me where I was. I told him I was camping, but yet he had never spoke after I told him where I was. His voice sounded distorted. I wanted to go home after that and felt very uneasy. Ella was asking the same thing, so that's where we were headed. Now Ella and me were both animal lovers. We would never just let a hurt animal be alone. We had seen a dog that looked like a German shepherd, but a sheepdog at the same time. Ella walked over to see if the dog was okay, as it was laying there not moving. As she walked closer and closer to the thing, the woods went dead silent. So silent you could hear a pin drop. Me being very interested in the woods and outdoors, I knew if the forest went silent as it was, then it meant there was a presence or an animal that was a threat nearby. I told my friend Ella to back up, as she had almost touched the thing. Then I smelled this rotting smell, and I almost threw up. So did Ella. The thing now had stood up on 2 legs as a human would, still turned around. As the thing started to turn around, I saw a very human-like smile, but its teeth were too sharp to be a dog's or a human's. The thing started to lunge towards me and Ella. I almost soiled myself. I told my friend Ella to run to my home, and I would soon be there as well. Now Ella, being well, Ella, she went to camp to grab her things. I ran home and called my brother, and I spent hours calling for Ella. And after hours of crying and hours of calling, she finally answered. She was back. I had asked Ella very many times where she was and why she stayed to get her things, as I did not. I never told anyone this story, but now I am sharing it. Hen Shack Shaking Bigfoot, Parts 1 and 2, from Mike J8492. Along the line of the Bigfoot activity I've encountered, I remember the most scariest event of 2003 in the summertime, before my 11th birthday. It was dark, and my family had a cookout for dinner. There was a hen shack located northwest of my aunt's house, while north down a small stone-stepped slope to my grandparents' house, roughly 50 yards apart. Also, the pen had been abandoned for 4 years due to it getting broken into, and my uncle swore he saw a humanoid hairy man running into the forest, which was 70 yards away, and there was a horrid smell when the wind blew from where the creature ran. He said it smelled like a wet dog, and dead corpse, and fecal matter, and huge. So back to the story. Well, we had a fire going in the front yard, and we live in a forested area in Oklahoma by the Tin Killer Lake area, where we were singing along to the sound of the radio playing some classic rock and roll. Around 9, we heard a bang on the shack, which was maybe 30 yards away, nearly out of range of the security light, so we all agreed it was a branch. There were 8 of us there. I probably forgot to mention my grandparents, 2 aunts, 2 cousins, and my sister and I. So we continued to enjoy the tunes and enjoy some snacks when more bangs started to become louder than the radio, and we all got up, and my older aunt turned off the radio, and my youngest cousin ran to get a flashlight and his brother's .22 rifle. The banging lasted 3 minutes, and when it stopped, we all saw the most terrifying sight. Red-looking eyes shined back, and the face got covered by its left arm before anyone could really catch a feature. The sound made next scared us all except my grandpa, who had told me about these creatures that had existed. It was a loud howl that made everyone's chest vibrate, and we had to cover our ears, and the sound was never recognized until we found the Sierra recordings, which made my younger aunt faint when played to her to see if it was a match. While the sound was blowing our ears, my older cousin shot his gun in the air, and it stopped and let out a long growl and started hitting the shack 4 times in a row. He then shot towards the shack, not to actually shoot it, but to let it be known we didn't want that trouble in our area. That thing ran towards the forest, and the vibrations could be felt from the running it was doing. We gathered everything that needed to be taken in, and of course took it in. After the fire was put out, we all had to separate to go back to both the houses. My older cousin watched as my grandparents and I hurried down the steps to go in. We all slept in the dining room with the couches blocking both doors, and made sure our room doors were locked, and we had our keys to them in case a break-in happened by the creature. We did not hear anything the rest of the night, but in the future would happen again in that area, at my deceased grandparents' old home, still in the family hands. This is a true event. At the beginning of the school year in 2003, after the hen shack incident, new neighbors moved in close by at about 400 yards away. How I met them was by riding my bike up and down the street, which was a big trouble on the account of it being curvy and the neighbors that lived nearby, who had dogs that loved to chase me. Well, here I am walking my bike towards our driveway when someone yells, "Are you lost?" As I turn around to see who it is that asked me that, I hear those evil dogs beginning to bark not too far away from where I'm at, so I yell back, "Run!" While doing so, I fumbled, hopping onto my bike, and my foot slipped off the pedal. The kid didn't know what I meant until he saw the 2 Rottweilers come out of the woods down the road from me. He turns and begins to run fast towards his house, and as I come to the spot he was just in, he turns to look back and screams, "Follow me!" So there we were, on the run from dogs, when suddenly the dogs stopped and started to whimper, then turned and ran back the way they came. Then, out of nowhere, that horrid stench hits my nostrils, and I begin to cover my nose, and this kid asks me, "Did you fart? It smells dead. You might want to get that checked." Speechless as I was, and it was to the point I could not move my body because a dreadful feeling had washed over me, and it became a fight or flight response. He asks me, "Are you a mute or deaf?" "Neither," I said after composing myself, so he did not worry, but he could tell by my expression there was something wrong with the stench around us. "Let's go," he says quite quickly as I get off my bike. We start walking, lost track of the stench after a short time walking with my friend, who I know now as BB, and the feelings were seeming back to normal until my wristwatch started beeping, and I noticed that I will be late for dinner if I don't leave now. "Well, it's nice to meet you, but I have to go home now." He replies, "Is it safe to go home?" "Maybe you can come over, and maybe my dad or mom can give you a lift. We have a truck." Could I go with him, or do my best to make it home on my own? Then again, as I thought fast, I would have to go back through where the Bigfoot had been watching us. Okay, but I'm scared of the dark. It was a lie to actually have a ride past the area in case it was still lurking there. No problem. My dad will more than likely give you a ride home because you can't see anything around these curves, he says as we walk. So the conversation led to us having some interesting topics. He was not one to believe a giant, hairy, man-like creature out there in any part of the world. He would know sooner or later when the screams and whoops came through on some nights. We reached his house in 15 minutes, maybe less, when I noticed the sun is setting, and my fear of being alone walking near dusk with a creature out there made me stop in my tracks. "Hey, I managed to say when a voice hollers, 'Who's your new friend?' We get introduced and handshake. I tell him my name. He tells me his, which is George. BB then proceeds to ask his father for the ride to get me home. Well, I don't see why not. He did warn you about those dogs, George says, and heads towards his truck and pulls the gate open, and we walk over and put my bike in. How far do we go? I say. Not too far, maybe half a mile. He looked dumbfounded, and then I remind him of the dogs. After he started up the truck, BB then tells his dad about the stench that scared away the dogs. More than likely, a skunk sprayed out of fear from the barking dogs, said George, turning onto the road a few moments later, passing the scene where we encountered the dogs. He slows down, and no smell at all, which was a relief if I had to go back on my own. We turn onto our driveway, and he says, "Will this be fine?" "Yes, sir, it is. And thank you so much for the ride. You saved my legs from riding around all day." We all chuckled, and I got out, and BB helped me get my bike out and said our goodbyes and made plans to hang out at school. Not too far from home, I thought, as I walked up the gravel hill. And again, that smell seemed to creep up from the wind changing directions, from in front of me to my left side, which was the forest. Dread, sorrow, sadness, the feeling of eyes watching me. The hair on the back of my neck stands straight outwards. Then I hear the sound of breathing, rough, heavy, deep breathing, and I take a step, and a deep growl sounded out, so I stopped dead in my tracks. Branches snap as my fear rises, and the thought of never being found crossed my mind, and my eyes began to tear up. The most wonderful sound pierced through the heavy breathing, and it was the sound of my uncle's '84 Camaro, and revved up a few times. Then the loud burnout, letting me know my uncle was going to come through where I was down the driveway. Lights coming from my uncle's car hit me, and he honked and did not stop until he yelled for me to get in fast. The moment I was in, he put it in reverse and stepped on the gas pedal to the floor, and we were leaving while the tires kicked rocks to the front. I managed to look back in time to see the Bigfoot disappear behind a tree that was no longer than 5 feet from where I was standing. We rushed into the house and told everyone what happened. Come to find out, my uncle saw a smaller one that was crossing behind me, and a bigger one that looked like it was going to grab me when his lights landed on me and them. I was scared they were going to take you, my uncle said with tears building up in his eyes. Thank you, I replied. The next day at school, BB asked me if I knew of any strange sounds that go bump in the night. Told him, just Bigfoot around once in a while with a kid too? He says, not true at all. That was the night that I had my first encounter alone with them. So be careful when you ride your bike trying to make new friends on the back road in a forested area near a lake. Never know if Bigfoot will grab you. Someone in the Woods. From Catherine. My name is Catherine, and I've always loved the thrill of entertainment. But one particular day turned into something far more terrifying than I ever could have imagined. It started as a simple outing with my two best friends, Carissa and Avery. We often spent time at Avery's house because she had a large wooded area behind her property. It was the perfect place for us to explore, joke around, and let our imaginations run wild. But that day, our curiosity led us straight into something we'll never forget. It all started when Avery casually mentioned something strange. "Hey guys, there's a dead deer in the woods," she said. Naturally, we wanted to check it out. A dead deer in the woods wasn't necessarily unusual, but for some reason, the way she said it made my stomach twist. Still, we decided to go see for ourselves. Bad mistake. We followed what we thought were deer tracks, moving deeper into the woods, but there was no sign of the deer. At first, we thought maybe another animal had dragged it away. The forest was eerily quiet, aside from the occasional rustling of leaves beneath our feet. As we walked, something else caught our attention. Something far stranger than a missing deer carcass. Smiley faces, carved into tree bark, drawn into the dirt, and even scraped into the snow. Creepy, uneven, smiley faces that seemed to appear more frequently the farther we went. I hadn't noticed them at first, but once I did, my skin prickled with unease. "This is really creepy," Carissa whispered, glancing around nervously. Despite the uneasy feeling creeping over us, we pressed on. Maybe it was some kind of prank. Maybe it was just our imaginations making things worse than they were. We reassured ourselves with these thoughts, but that didn't explain the chill in the air or the way my stomach clenched tighter with every step. Then we saw the word. Deer. It was written in uneven, jagged letters on the trunk of a tree. It looked hastily scratched into the bark, like someone had done it in a hurry. My heart began to pound. We stopped, looking at each other, waiting for someone to suggest we turn back. But for some stupid reason, we didn't. We kept going. We had almost convinced ourselves that it was all just a weird coincidence when we saw another word, this time scrawled into the snow in large, uneven letters. Kill. I felt my stomach twist into knots. The air around us seemed to grow colder. My body tensed, and the logical part of my brain screamed at me to turn around and run. This wasn't a game anymore. Someone had been here before us. Someone had written that message, and they were probably still here. "We need to go," I said, my voice shaking. "Now." Before anyone could argue, I turned on my heel and started sprinting back toward Avery's house. Carissa and Avery were right behind me, our feet crunching against the snow-covered ground as we ran. But just as we reached the edge of the woods, something made me glance over my shoulder. That's when I saw him. A man stood in the distance, partially hidden by the trees. He was old, with dark gray hair, a plaid shirt, and ripped-up jeans. His posture was eerily still, but the thing that made my blood turn to ice was the knife in his hand. He wasn't running after us, but he didn't have to. He just stood there, watching. "Run faster!" I screamed, pushing my legs harder than I ever had before. I could feel tears stinging my eyes, but I didn't dare stop. My breath came in quick, panicked gasps, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. By the time we burst through Avery's back door, I slammed it shut behind us, locking it immediately. We all stood there for a moment, panting, wide-eyed, too shocked to speak. We tried to calm down, convincing ourselves that maybe it had just been some creepy old man messing with us. Maybe he wasn't actually dangerous. Maybe we were overreacting. But then we found the note. Later that evening, when we had finally calmed down enough to peek outside, curiosity got the best of us. We stepped cautiously onto the back porch, our breath visible in the cold air. And there, sitting on the porch railing, was a small folded piece of paper. I hesitated before picking it up. My hands shook as I unfolded the note, revealing the chilling message inside. "I'll get you one day." Underneath the words was the same eerie, smiley face we had seen in the woods. I dropped the note as if it had burned me, stepping back in horror. Avery covered her mouth, her face pale. Carissa let out a shaky breath. None of us knew what to say. We never went back into those woods again. I still don't know who that man was or what he wanted. Was he watching us the whole time? Did he leave the smiley faces and messages for us to find? Or were we just in the wrong place at the wrong time? I don't have the answers, but I do know one thing. If you ever feel like something is wrong in the woods, trust your gut. Turn around, go home. Because you never know who or what might be waiting for you in the trees. The Shadow in the Woods. From Anonymous. I was 10 years old when my 3 brothers and I had one of the most terrifying experiences of our lives. We grew up in a house that backed up to acres of dense forest, a place that had been our playground for as long as I could remember. We had spent countless hours exploring the old logging trails, climbing trees, and building forts deep in the woods. It was our territory, a place we knew better than anyone. But that day, something changed. It started as just another afternoon adventure. My older brother, who was 12 at the time, led the way down one of the well-worn paths, while my younger twin brothers, 8 years old, trailed close behind me. The sun filtered through the canopy, casting long shadows across the trail, and the air was thick with the smell of pine and damp earth. We laughed and talked, kicking up dust as we walked, completely at ease in the place that had always felt like home. Then, without warning, everything shifted. A sudden wave of unease washed over me. It was like stepping into a place I wasn't supposed to be, a feeling so intense it made my skin crawl. The laughter died in our throats as we all came to a stop at the same time. The forest had gone silent. No birds chirping, no wind rustling through the trees. Just an oppressive, suffocating stillness. We weren't alone. I don't know how we knew it, but we did. Something was watching us. We stood frozen, scanning the trees, expecting to see movement. An animal, a person, anything. But there was nothing. Just the dense tangle of branches and undergrowth, stretching endlessly in every direction. The fear settled into my bones like ice water. Then, as if we all reached the same conclusion at once, we bolted. We ran as fast as we could, crashing through the underbrush, breath coming in ragged gasps. We didn't stop until we burst into the backyard, the safety of our house finally in sight. Even then, we didn't speak for a long time, each of us trying to make sense of what had just happened. It would have been easy to dismiss it as our imaginations running wild, but the way we all felt it at the same time, the way the woods fell silent, it wasn't normal. That should have been the end of it. A childhood scare, nothing more. But it wasn't. A few weeks later, we ventured deeper into the woods, testing our courage. This time we went farther than ever before, nearly 15 minutes from home. It was bright out, the kind of day where the sunlight felt warm and safe, chasing away the shadows from our last encounter. We had almost convinced ourselves that we had imagined everything, until it happened again. We had just started down a new path when we heard it. A crashing sound not far away, coming through the trees. It was loud, too loud to be a deer or any small animal. It sounded like something big, something heavy, moving fast. We turned to look, but we saw nothing. The trees stood still, the undergrowth undisturbed, but the sound was still coming. Closer. That primal fear returned instantly. My older brother's face went pale, and without a word, we all ran. The crashing followed us, pounding through the trees. But no matter how fast we moved, we never saw what was making the noise. We just knew it was there, right behind us, getting closer. I don't remember the run home, just the overwhelming panic, the way my heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst. We didn't stop until we were back in the yard, panting, hands on our knees, trying to convince ourselves that we were safe now. We never saw it. We never knew what was out there, chasing us. But something was, and whatever it was, it wanted us gone. For a long time, we stayed out of the woods. But as kids do, we eventually convinced ourselves that we had imagined it, that it was just an animal, maybe even another person messing with us. We tried to push it to the back of our minds, until one final night made sure we never forgot. It was late, long after dark, when my older brother and I sat on the back porch, staring out at the tree line. The moon was full, casting just enough light to make out the shapes of the trees swaying gently in the breeze. It should have been peaceful, but the woods no longer felt like home. They felt like something else entirely, something that had never really belonged to us. Then we saw it. A shadow just beyond the first line of trees. It wasn't moving, just standing there, too far to make out any features but unmistakable in its shape. It wasn't an animal. It was tall, human-like, but wrong. We didn't move. We didn't breathe. And then, slowly, almost deliberately, it took a step forward. That was all it took. We scrambled inside, locking the door behind us, too afraid to look back. By the time we worked up the nerve to peek outside again, the yard was empty. The woods were quiet, but the feeling of being watched never really left. We don't go into those woods anymore. Even now, years later, I still get chills thinking about what happened out there. I don't know if it was something supernatural, something explainable, or just something that will forever remain a mystery. But I do know one thing. Something was in those woods with us, and I don't think it ever really left. A satanic ritual. From a Miniator. Trigger warning. Graphic violence. As a child, I had no real understanding of the paranormal. Like many kids, I grew up watching cartoons that painted ghosts as friendly, harmless figures. But that illusion didn't last long. I grew up in a region where dense woods stretched every 500 meters, hiding small villages within them. My own village was steeped in ancient rituals and cult practices, though as a child, I mistook these ceremonies for simple celebrations, marriages, or local festivals. However, one night, I witnessed something that would forever haunt me. I was 12 years old, and it was late at night. My family was among the most respected elders in the area, and though we had all witnessed strange occurrences over the years, we never openly acknowledged them. Supernatural entities were dismissed as folklore, not something to be feared. That night, I woke up needing to relieve myself. I had always prided myself on being fearless, so I decided to go outside alone. But as I stepped into the night, an unsettling feeling washed over me. An invisible force seemed to push back against me, as if my own body was trying to stop me from moving forward. Then I saw it. In the distance, partially hidden by the trees, a ritual was taking place. The participants wore eerie, bird-like masks, resembling the plague doctor masks of the 1500s. My stomach twisted as I realized this was no ordinary gathering. At the center of the group was a bound and mummified figure, alive, screaming, with only his eyes left uncovered. The raw terror in his gaze sent chills through my body, and as I took another hesitant step forward, his eyes locked onto mine, bulging in sheer horror, as if silently begging for help. The masked figures surrounded him, their movements deliberate, methodical. One of them raised a knife, and I watched in horror as they began severing his limbs one by one. Blood pooled beneath him as he writhed and screamed. Then, with an almost practiced efficiency, they moved to his chest. Finally, they beheaded him, leaving no trace of life in his mutilated body. But the ritual wasn't over. They poured a thick black liquid over the remains. At first, nothing happened. Then slowly the corpse began to twitch. It was faint at first, like an unnatural shudder, but it grew stronger, its body convulsing in a grotesque, jerking motion. I could only stare in horror, frozen in place, as this lifeless form began to move. I must have made a noise, because one of the masked figures turned toward me. For a brief moment, there was silence. Then, one of them stepped forward, a butcher knife glinting in his hand, the same one they had used to dismember the body. Panic surged through me. Without thinking, I turned and ran. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. I was the fastest runner in my village, and I pushed my body to its limit, tearing through the woods without daring to look back. By the time I reached home, my body was shaking uncontrollably, my mind racing. I looked at the time, 2:37 a.m. I wanted to wake someone, to tell them what I had seen, but the sheer terror in my bones kept me silent. I knew they wouldn't believe me. I spent the rest of the night lying awake, my thoughts consumed by the image of that mummified man and the unnatural movement of his body after death. The next morning, I cautiously approached my great-grandmother. She had always known things others didn't, held wisdom that went beyond the ordinary. I told her, in hushed whispers, what I had seen. She listened, her face unreadable. Then she said, "It was a ritual meant to give wandering spirits a new birth, one different from ordinary humans." I asked her what she meant, but she only shook her head. "You are too young to understand. It's best to forget what you saw." Forget? How could I ever forget? They dismissed me, treating it as if nothing had happened. But I knew what I had seen was real. To this day, the memory lingers like a shadow, always at the edge of my thoughts. I don't walk alone at night anymore. I don't go near the woods, because some things, once seen, can never be unseen. My encounter with the unknown, from Quillink. This story happens on a warm, sunny afternoon. I was 12 and with a couple of friends in the woods, just trying to have fun, scare each other, and be stupid teenagers. As we were walking, we heard a light, faint moaning sound. At first, we thought it was just the wind, but we soon figured it was not. We were near these old shack buildings. There was one made of silvery metal, one that was old wood, but out of these, only one stood out. It almost looked like a small house, like a really small house. There was a swing and a bench in front of the house, and of course, us being curious, we decided to go near it, but I soon wished we had not. As soon as we got near the house, that's when we heard the moan. It was quiet at first, but then it slowly got louder and louder, but then it just stopped. Then all of a sudden, there was a high-pitched, blood-curdling scream. Then we saw something with long arms and legs, and it looked like it had antlers, but I am not fully sure. It came running towards us, and me and my friends ran as fast as we could. It caught up to us, and it slightly cut me on my leg. It was almost nighttime, and we were afraid we had to spend the night with that thing. At some point, we slowed down, and we did not see it, so we thought we were good and had lost it. It was a good thing we knew how to make a fire, so we sat by the fire until about 3 o'clock in the morning, until we heard it. As soon as we heard it, we jumped up so fast I got lightheaded. The only light we had was the small light of the fire, so we could not really see anything, but we knew it was there, lurking in the shadows of the trees. It was silent. Then, all of a sudden, it came running towards us faster than before. I looked to my right, and I saw it, the reddish eyes. Then I heard a noise to my left, and so I jerked my head to the left and saw something else in there. I did not want to wait to see what it was, so me and my friends ran harder than ever before, and after about 6 minutes of running, I saw the end of the forest, and we made it out. But as soon as we got out of the forest, they just disappeared. I still feel like it's watching me whenever I take out the trash or through the window. It's almost like it is just waiting to attack me. I have talked to some people about this, but they just say I was crazy. But I know I saw something. I know I did. It has been 3 years since I have seen it, and I am still terrified, never knowing if it will ever just jump out and it be the last of me, never knowing if I will ever see my loved ones again. But I am still alive, thankfully. If I encounter them again, I hope I will still be alive to tell you. If anyone knows what this might have been, tell me. I need to know what this is and if I can get rid of it. That is all I have for right now. If you may have any possible idea or information, please tell me, and I will be grateful.